Hello guys, and welcome back to another video. Now then, today's video is going to be a little bit different. I'm actually going to be showing you and explaining to you a modification for your BMW that will completely transform your engine, but it's a little bit illegal. Now, I think we'll get outside and yeah, I'll go ahead and just show you exactly what I mean. Okay then, so here we are in the engine bay of my BMW E60 5 Series, and I'm going to show you exactly where the mod is placed. It is in fact in the engine bay, but first I'm going to remove the engine cover just so we can have better access. So then, this is the BMW N47 engine. It is the 2-litre 4-cylinder diesel engine from BMW, and the part that I'm actually going to be talking about is on pretty much any engine. So any guesses as to what you think it may be? I'm going to show you right now. Okay then, so the part that I'm going to show you, or the lack of part in our case because it has been removed, is the Egr valve. So then, if you are clued up with this engine, if you have seen this engine before, you'll probably notice it looks a little bit different. As you can see, there is no Egr valve or Egr cooler present on this engine. Now, as you can see here, we have a blank on the exhaust manifold, and we have another blank here on the intake port as well. And then we have one just down here to block off the coolant port. So for those of you who do not know how an Egr valve works and why it is in place, it is essentially an emissions control device. So essentially what it does, it takes some of the exhaust gases from the exhaust manifold and feeds it back through a cooler and then back through the intake port to essentially be burnt off again. Now, the reason why these Egr valves are present on engines today is obviously to lower emissions. Now, Egrs mainly lower the nitrous oxide levels an engine produces. Now, typically between 1 and 2000 RPM is when the Egr valve is most active. Now, if you are on full throttle, if you are way above 2000 RPM, the Egr valve will be completely closed and you won't have any exhaust gases going through the Egr system. Now, this is because when you are on full throttle, obviously you want full power. Now, when you have exhaust gases going back through the intake manifold, when you have hot exhaust gases, it's going to equal less power because hot air is less dense. You want as cold air as possible to produce as much power as possible. And now this brings me to my first drawback of the Egr system. So obviously, yes, it is great by design for lowering the nitrous oxide levels an engine produces, but when it is active between typically 1 and 2000 RPM, you are going to notice a significant drop in power, or should I say, once you have removed the Egr system, you will notice a significant increase in power. Now, that is not even the biggest problem that the Egr systems produce. The biggest problem that the Egr system produces is the fact that the intake manifold gets completely full of a sooty, oily mess. Now, the reason for this is obviously because we have exhaust gases, and exhaust gases are generally quite sooty and dirty. We have them going back through into the intake manifold, and then you also have the crankcase ventilation system working as it should, which brings the oil vapors back through the intake system. So couple the sooty exhaust gases with oil vapor, it essentially lines the entire intake manifold with a sooty, oily mess, and also coats the inside of the intake ports as well, which obviously over time restricts power because it restricts the overall airflow, and it can cause a whole host of other problems. Now, there really is no getting around this if you have an Egr valve in place. It is essentially by design going to fail all the time, and there is just nothing that you can do other than periodically clean the valve. But then again, you are going to end up with an intake manifold that is full of soot. And to remove the intake manifold on most cars, it's not the easiest of tasks. It probably takes at least an hour to remove this intake manifold. Obviously there is a lot of different cables and a lot of trim panels, etc., that need to be removed, so it is not the most enjoyable of tasks, and it can get very messy as well. And so if you do want your intake manifold nice and clean and free of soot and an oily mess, and you want to achieve the full power that your engine can produce, you're really only going to be able to achieve that with the EGR valve not active. Now when it comes to removing the EGR valve, you do have a few options. Now because this came with an EGR valve and an EGR cooler, one option would be to just blank the EGR valve itself, so the EGR valve cannot pass any exhaust gases. Another option is to just switch off the EGR in the software side of things, so the EGR valve again will not open to pass any exhaust gases through. Or you have the option of just completely removing the entire assembly like I did, thus creating a lot better access in the engine bay and just completely removing something that is not going to be used in its entirety ever. And as you can see, we do have the original connectors here for the EGR system, and that is nice and tightly tucked away, and everything is now working perfectly. Now there's a few things to note if you are thinking of removing your EGR valve, or in fact blanking it off or just closing it through the means of software. And you do have a DPF in place. If you have a diesel particulate filter on your engine, then that filter itself may get more blocked. And the reasons for that is because, well, you had some exhaust gases going back through your intake manifold before, but now you're going to have 100% of the exhaust gases going back through your exhaust, meaning going back through your DPF. But in reality, that only really becomes a problem if you are doing short journeys and you are not getting the DPF up to temperature for it to do a regeneration. Now in an ideal world, you would remove the EGR system and the DPF system from your car to gain the most power from your engine, but that is entirely up to you what you wish to do. Okay then, so this video isn't to tell you whether or not you should or you shouldn't remove your EGR valves. It's just more of to show you the pros and the cons of doing so. Obviously the decision is ultimately down to yourselves, but in my opinion, your engine will thank you for it if you do decide to remove it. It's just one less thing to worry about. And when it comes to diesel engines in particular, petrol engines as well, but when it comes to diesel engines in particular, it is generally one of the biggest problems. And it's one of those things that really just makes modern engines today unreliable. Now there is one thing to note though, if you do want to go ahead and remove your EGR valve physically, then you will need to get it removed from the software. Typically when you get your car tuned, or if you go for a remap, then you can just ask the tuner to switch off the EGR valve. At that point it makes sense to remove the EGR, or if you're going to remove the DPF as well, remove that before you go ahead and get it tuned, or before you go ahead and get a remap. Okay then, so I hope you have enjoyed this video. I hope you have found it helpful. Please remember to give it a like, leave a comment down below, subscribe if you have not already done so, and I will see you all in that next one. Peace!